My name is Veronica Perrin, and I'm a jazz musician, and I live in Northumberland. A couple of years ago, I was researching my great-grandfather, Archdeacon Malcolm Graham, online, when I came across information about him compiled by the Trentham World War One project. I got in touch with them, and this led to my first visit to Trentham in 2016. I saw the church where my great-grandfather had preached. I saw the vestry named after him. I got the feeling that I was walking in his footsteps, and I felt a deep connection with this man. It made me greatly regret that I'd never met him, as I would have loved to have asked him questions about his time in Trentham, about the people who lived here, and the lives that they led, particularly during the dark days of the First World War. I decided I would walk up to the vicarage. As I got nearer, I imagined him walking towards me. He was coming to meet me. He was inviting me in for tea.
Wow, look at this. You know, this is exactly how I imagined your vicarage, Grandpa.
Sit down.
Thank you. Yes.
Would you like some tea, sir?
Yes, how are we doing for sugar?
I'm afraid we've run out of our ration this week.
No, it's fine. I don't take it anyway.
Thanks, Harriet.
Would it be all right if I called you Great-Grandpa?
Oh, yes. I would like that. Now, what would you like to know?
I've just been looking at the Trentham Memorial Cross. It stands very proudly in front of the mausoleum, and I wondered about how it came to be there. Were you part of that, Great-Grandpa?
Oh, yes, indeed, but I was only a part of a committee. On Sunday it was unveiled by Sir Hill Child, a brigadier, and our local Member of Parliament. I was honoured to perform the dedication. The Memorial Committee was formed back in 1919 with Mr. Ernest Cornforth as the main instigator. He's one of my church wardens and a man who's used to getting things done. His charming wife, Emma, was also crucial to the completion of the memorial. I think I have a transcript of Cornforth's first letter here somewhere. That'll give you an idea of how it all started. I've been reflecting today on the whole saga.
Ernest Cornforth, The White House, Trentham. Letter to Mr. Todd, Trentham Agent for the Duke of Sutherland. March 21st, 1919. Dear Mr. Todd, I reported your suggestion to the Vicar this morning that you considered it high time to start planning a memorial for fallen heroes. The Vicar entirely agrees and suggests that a preliminary meeting be held at the Institute the week after this one. Archdeacon Graham proposes that it be a meeting of Trentham people, as distinct from simply church members, and the memorial decided on shall be for the whole parish and not just St. Mary's. At this meeting, some plans could be evolved to submit to a larger meeting. The secretary of the Trentham and Handford Sewing Party is my wife, and she has funds in hand which amount to around £170. Emma is of the opinion that her committee will consider it appropriate to allocate this to the Trentham Memorial for our soldiers. Yours faithfully, Ernest Cornforth.
So that explains the inscription. This memorial cross is a gift from the women of Trentham. I wondered about that.
Yes, the women were proud to do it. It was money that was left over from funds they raised through garden fetes and penny collections to make comforts for our soldiers at the front. Harriet did some knitting, didn't you? Was it Mrs. Cornforth's sewing group that you were in?
Yes, sir. There were about 12 of us. My favourite was a balaclava, which was sent over for our men. I like to think of those and the socks helped to keep them warm, as well as reminding them that we were thinking of them back home.
Will that be all, sir?
Yes, Harry, please. Let me know when the sentinel arrives. Thank you. You see, Veronica, the initial idea we had was for a new wing on the Institute, dedicated to the fallen men. But at a large public meeting, I remember that all changed when Mr. John Power argued strongly for a memorial cross.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is John Power, and that's spelt Power. My parents came here from Germany over 50 years ago, and I was born in Fenton. We ran a successful wine merchant's business on Piccadilly in Hanley, and we moved into Albert Road around 15 years ago. With the coming of war and considerable anti-German feeling which exposed me to some unpleasantness, which I won't go into, I changed the spelling of my name to the English Power, with the same pronunciation as our German name. I am in every sense an Englishman. A new wing to the Institute has been suggested, but I propose that, now in a time of peace, the good people of Trentham should erect a memorial cross bearing the names of those who fell in action for our country, so they'll never be forgotten. But we must also support the dependents, the wounded and disabled who live among us in this community. This is my proposal, that we erect a fitting memorial in a prominent location in Trentham, which the community, and especially the families of those that were lost, could visit to pay their respects and remember. If the good women who have worked so hard supporting our soldiers can contribute to such a memorial, that would be the most fitting. I should consider it an honour to serve on this committee, if others are agreeable. Thank you for your time.
And all present agreed with his suggestion.
John Power sounds as if he's an influential man.
Sadly, his German name caused much suspicion and got him into trouble in the war, so he changed it to John Power with an English spelling, and has now left the district. Cornforth and I were just two of many who felt he was always a loyal resident of Trentham.
Oh, that's sad. Did it happen to anyone else?
Yes, the Wenger family came in for some criticism too. They moved into the old vicarage when we came to this house in 1911.
Adolf Wenger of the Priory, Trentham. My father came from Switzerland to make his home in this country over 50 years ago. My mother is English, and I was born here in Stoke-on-Trent. Our family quickly established itself in the ceramics industry, particularly in creating and manufacturing the colours needed in the decoration of pottery ware. Isabel and I moved our family into Trentham in 1911, and I value being part of this community on the edge of the city, where, among other things, I can indulge my passion for fox hunting. We didn't change our Swiss name in response to anti-German feeling as Mr. Power did. But after our factory in Etruria was targeted, the Sentinel were good enough to publish a photograph showing members of the Wenger family as serving officers in the British Army. Indeed, we view the world as Englishmen. I'm honoured to serve as a member of the parish council alongside Archdeacon Malcolm Graham, and that man has been a tower of strength over the past few years and has worked tirelessly to support his parishioners, particularly those who were sadly bereaved.
We have a close Christian community, but sometimes it doesn't feel that way.
It sounds as if they're very lucky to have you as their vicar. Who was at the unveiling? Was it the families of the men who were lost?
Yes, it was most poignant. Margaret Force was there, also William and Fanny Paget, as well as the Challoners, the Smiths and the Hemmings sisters. Some were quite unable to sing the last hymn on resurrection morning. I saw many handkerchiefs raised and noses blown when the last post sounded.
But I'm guessing it was really sad for you too, great-grandpa. You lost two of your loved ones during that time. And can you tell me something about my great-grandmother?
Yes, dear Florence.
I was Malcolm's wife, Florence. We were married 35 years, but sadly, in recent years, I was in poor health with chest problems. Our house up on the hill with its glorious views was actually built for us by the Duke of Sutherland, because the old vicarage was much too big and draughty. The air in Trentham was certainly cleaner than in Burslem, where Malcolm had served before. But by the time we moved here, I believe the damage was done. We spent 19 happy years at St. Paul's in Burslem, and in the 1890s, Malcolm often came down here to Trentham to play golf. Sometimes I would join him and play a few hands of bridge at the clubhouse. We had 4 beautiful children, of whom I was very proud. Ruth was called to God in 1914. But our sons are all doing well in their chosen fields. The old Duke of Sutherland was always kind and generous. He not only paid for the new vicarage with electricity, but also increased Malcolm's living, for which we were grateful.
His son, the 5th Duke, isn't so easy to get on with, but he was fair to his tenants who went off to fight. Of course, it was a difficult time, as his tenants knew the estate was to be sold, but it was still a shock when some were served with eviction notices on Lady Day in 1919. This meant there was no appetite for peace celebrations here in Trentham. In the end, some of the long-standing estate workers were allowed to buy their cottages after the estate auction or stay on at preferential rates. I still can't forgive the Duke, though, for allowing golf to be played on a Sunday and music in the gardens. I even wrote to the Sentinel about it, but it made no difference.
I can see you might not think that a good idea. I heard you played golf with the Duke. Is that true?
Yes, it is. The 4th Duke, Cromarty, was a fine sportsman and sat well on a horse too.
My name is Sutherland, the 4th to bear the dukedom of that name, and the 2nd son of George Granville. I would often see the Reverend Graham on the golf course, but come the winter, my passion switched to ice skating, and whenever the lake at Trentham froze over, I would organise ice hockey matches. I remember some 20 years ago, Malcolm Graham brought a team of clergy to play against my team, and we trounced them. Not sure he ever forgave me for that. You know, Trentham Hall was once regarded as having some of the finest gardens in the country, if not in Europe. I was rightly proud to be the owner of such a magnificent estate. My wife, of course, was very popular with the local community, where she worked hard to help those in need. You may have heard of the Lady Millicent.
I'm Millicent, Dowager Duchess of Sutherland, widow of Cromarty, from whom you've already heard. I'm quite famous in the potteries, partly due to Mr. Arnold Bennett, whom I know based his Countess of Chell in the card upon me, and some potteries folk may refer to me as Meddlesome Millie, but my achievements are many. I recall the summer the Archdeacon and Mrs. Graham came to Trentham. I ran a huge bazaar at the gardens and raised £5,000 for the Cripples' Guild, an organisation I founded to train the handicapped in skills and crafts such as bookbinding and metalwork. After my husband Strath died, I threw myself into war work. I drove ambulances in Belgium and then ran a war hospital near Dunkirk. My fluency in French and German came in useful when I was captured by the Germans, but I escaped and was awarded the Croix de Guerre by the French. I have made some mistakes in my life and have also known great sadness, particularly with the recent loss of my son to malaria. But I hope in years to come that I will be remembered for the Cripples' Guild above all else. Some of the metalwork is just exquisite and timeless.
Look at this. Made in the workshop of the Cripples' Guild. Amazing what they can do. Gentlemen like George Kent and later Francis Edwards were responsible for training the workers. Well, during the war, the workshops in Trentham Park were used for making munitions. And since the war, they're teaching some of the disabled soldiers new skills down there.
Oh, that's really beautiful. What amazing craftsmanship. The Duchess sounds like an extraordinary woman. Why did they decide to leave Trentham?
Many reasons, really. The poor polluted Trent always gets the blame, but Strath sold off other estates as well so that he could invest in Canada, considered to be the latest money-making venture. After more than 20 years of marriage, I knew once he had an idea in his head, there was no possibility of changing his mind. This could be why I enjoyed my war work as I did. For the first time in my life, I could actually take charge. Of course, I was heartbroken to lose Trentham, and would have liked the hall to become an art museum. I felt my whole world was crumbling around me when that didn't happen. I know it was a great blow to the parish when the Sutherland family left Trentham in 1905, a few years before the Grahams came. The hall, which felt almost like a palace, was sadly demolished in 1912. However, we left the park in the charge of trustees and freely accessible to the people of Trentham. The gardens were open to the paying public in 1909, with added attractions like tennis, bowls and croquet, with the lake being used for fishing and boating. Visitors still come from far and wide.
So, when the war began, what were the gardens and park used for?
Well, during the war, they used to bring wounded men from Stoke War Hospital down to the gardens for a splendid day out. The military used the park regularly to teach recruits trench digging and bayonet practice. Now the war is over, ex-soldiers are being helped back to full strength for employment by working in the kitchen gardens. Back in the time of the second Duke of Sutherland, an annual event started called Trentham Thursday in Wakes Week. Back then it was the only day that the family opened the park to the Potteries people. Now the gardens are open through the summer, but Potteries people still keep up the tradition on the Thursday of holiday week and come in their thousands. The Trentham Hotel does good business, as do the Snapes and others serving refreshments along the Longton Road for the passers-by. Mind you, it was rather a washout this August. Everyone got drenched.
This just came, sir.
Oh, it's from Peter Blair. He's got some bulbs for me. He'll bring them round later. Thank you, Harriet.
My name is Peter Blair, or Blair of Trentham, as I'm known in the horticultural circles. I was head gardener here at Trentham for 30 years, and at one time I oversaw the gardens for the Duke with a team of 75 gardeners working to ensure they reached his high standards. We maintained Fleming's magnificent glasshouses growing exotic fruits, but I fear they have all gone to ruin these last 10 years. When the Sutherlands left, Thomas Kay took over the kitchen gardens. And me, well, I became more involved with the horticultural side of the Royal Show and other agricultural shows, both the organising and judging. Not bad for a wee boy from Fife. My bairns have all been raised on Sassenach soil, and now I'm approaching 70. Perhaps I should be putting myself out to grass.
I should also mention the VADs. That stands for Voluntary Aid Detachments. And they were volunteers for all sorts of work connected to the war effort. Some trained as nurses. 2 of John Bailey's daughters went over to France to help in the hospitals there. Others, like Harriet was saying earlier, knitted mufflers, balaclavas and socks for the soldiers. Women like Amy Bickerton and Ethel Brandrick were justifiably proud of their contribution. And Mrs. Templeman ran the bandage room at the Stoke War Hospital for 4 years. Men who were too old to fight volunteered to transport wounded soldiers from ambulance trains to the war hospitals. Everyone stepped up and did their duty in one way or another.
Excuse me, sir. Mr. Clay is here with that garden seat you ordered.
Oh, splendid. I'll have a word with him. Could you tell Veronica about the marvellous job Abraham, Tom and Will did with those horses for the war, please?
Well, miss, the army needed horses over in France for riding on and for pulling carts, but they had to be trained, see? Well, Will Boxall, he used to hunt, and what he didn't know about horses wasn't worth knowing. Then Tom Furnival, well, he's worked with the hunt horses for years, and Abraham, he must have shod more horses than I've had hot dinners. Them 3 men trained thousands of horses to go to war. The horses would come on the train, then be walked down to the remount depot at Butterton. Abraham would make sure they were shod proper. He had lots of helpers. Young Jack Burt was one. And then Will and his son Arthur would use the park for training the horses for going to war.
Oh, thank you, Harriet. That sounds like really important war work. Did blacksmiths have to go to France with the horses?
Oh, yes, miss. Abraham trained lots of young men at the smithy so they could go over with the horses. It was sad Mr. Boxall died before the end of the war.
Oh, thank you, Harriet. Abraham and Fred are just putting the new seat in the orchard. I told them that you'd make them tea, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Harriet. Yes.
I'm starting to get a picture of Trentham during the war now. It seems a strong community, very strong. How did they all survive, knowing that their husbands and their brothers and fathers were all so far away and in such grave danger?
I like to think the church helped them. We all came together each Sunday and prayed in one voice for their safe return. Our church is dedicated to the Blessed Virgin, who was herself a mother, and that gives great comfort, you know. More than 40 men went from Trentham. Sidney Jones and Leonard Johnson were the first to go. Then James Adwick, the golf professional. Thankfully, most of them returned, and some were mentioned in dispatches. Horace Hackney was awarded the Croix de Guerre for gallantry in 1918, but his younger brother Colin was held as a prisoner of war in Germany. I fear men like Colin and poor Fred Walklett will never fully recover from their experiences. and I feel for their families.
You know, Great-Grandpa, as you've been talking, I've been thinking how the families, but particularly the wives and the mothers, must have dreaded the arrival of a telegram with the news that they feared the most.
That's true. Sidney Jones was the first to enlist and the first to die. His mother Anne took the news very hard. We mourned all our men who gave their lives, but I believe the saddest day of all was when we heard that the headmaster, Claude Force, had perished in 1918. I went into school with his wife Margaret to tell the children. And that was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Mrs. Force is just one of the exceptional women we're fortunate to have living in Trentham. They all played their part, by working on the land or in munitions or as VADs. They held their families and this community together during those dark days. One woman I must credit particularly is Edith French, our district nurse. She nursed my Florence, as she does all of us. Nothing is ever too much trouble. Babies coming at 2 a.m, or Fred Barnett putting a garden fork through his foot. She covers miles on that bicycle. She's indomitable. A real treasure here in Trentham.
Sentinels here, sir.
Oh, good. There may be a report on the unveiling of the memorial there.
Let's see that.
Yes.
Oh, look, sir, it's on page 5.
This is... Oh, that looks a very good report. And look, there are some photographs too.
Where is he?
Yes.
I covered the unveiling of the new memorial at Trentham on Sunday the 2nd of October 1921 for the Staffordshire Evening Sentinel. It appeared in the paper on Tuesday, October the 4th, and reads thus. In his address, Archdeacon Graham said he wanted to draw attention to the names engraved on the cross. When those names were inscribed, the one and only fact that the women of Trentham wanted to set before the eyes of the world was that these men died for their country. Therefore, no regiment or rank was added, because it was thought that all those who had fallen were on one level in making that great sacrifice. Archdeacon Graham believed the congregation would be perfectly safe in leaving these brothers of theirs in the care of him to whom they have just been saying in prayer, "Thou art too wise to make mistakes, and too good to be unkind." At the calling of the names of the fallen, the leading choir boy placed a beautiful wreath of roses at the foot of the cross on behalf of the women of Trentham. And another choir boy placed posies of roses as each of the names was read. A large number of beautiful floral tributes were laid around the base of the memorial cross by relatives of the fallen heroes. Yeah, I think I did a good job there. I'm right proud of that.
What do you think about the full memorial, Harriet?
I think it's a fine way to remember the men, miss. They were all very brave. Arthur and Harry Thorley used to work hard on the land. So did George Rogers and young Joseph Bassett. The farmers will miss them.
Gunner 2660 William Brandrick, Machine Gun Corps. You might know my father, the Trentham Police Sergeant, John Brandrick. I knew the men from Trentham, as came over to fight. Claude Force, the headmaster. George Paget, who was a clerk at Tompkinson's Engineering in Longton. Sidney Jones, the insurance man. Harold Smith, Alan Hughes, and Stan Fiddler, all office workers too. William Clark, Leonard Johnson, whom laboured day and night down the brickworks. William Challoner drove steamrollers for Bassett's. Tom Hemmings worked on the railways. But William Jones, He preferred horses and lived down at those Hunt stables. And me? I became a wood turner and moved to Leek, where I met my Hilda. Remember our names in the future. Remember us. Remember us. Remember us. Remember us.
For their families, they are simply irreplaceable. And they've left a breach in this community and empty pews in the church that can never be filled. The memorial will hopefully mean that their names will not be forgotten.
Oh, you know, Great-Grandpa, you're looking a bit tired now. I think this reminiscing may have opened old wounds, and you need to rest now. I can't tell you what a privilege it's been to have spent this time with you. You've painted a vivid picture for me of a really, really special place with a really, really special history, and given me an insight into community that faced the war together, which was wonderful. You know, what I'm going to do now as I leave is I'm going to take another look at that memorial. I'm going to look at the names now that I've heard all about them, and I'm going to reflect on our conversation.
Goodbye, Veronica, and may God bless you. Please take this book of mine as a keepsake. I wrote it while I was in Burslem. It will give you an idea of how the Potteries was before the war. Read it and think of me. I am so profoundly glad to have met you. And I will spend the rest of my time today in reflection and prayer.
Great-Grandpa, I feel such a strong connection right across the generations. I so wish I'd been able to tell you how fondly you are remembered here in Trentham.